Thank you very much, Professor, for giving us a very comprehensive account of the corruption situation in Lebanon. I mean, you highlighted the political problems, the problems of different political groups entrenched in the system, and how the patronage system and the in the system has been a real problem, including in terms of the clergy, the role of clergy. I mean, it's really sad because at some point of time, Lebanon, I mean, as you were explaining, you said that it has become a Disneyland of the entire Middle East. At some point of time, people call Lebanon the Switzerland of the Middle East. So I mean, it's really sad to see a country like Lebanon, and you ended on a very pessimistic note. There are a number of questions which will start coming. I thought maybe a few questions I can start with. For example, I mean, is Lebanon really heading to a kind of a bankruptcy? I mean, a state bankruptcy. Will it be issue related to kind of default payment of its debt? Also, in terms of if one looks at the foreign funds, I mean, Lebanon gets foreign funds from Saudi Arabia to many other rich countries in the region, to many other countries in the world. So how is that going to work out? Also, I mean, if just to we have with us Shri Hamid Ansari, who is the former Vice President of India, and I mean, collectively from all of us, perhaps he knows more than on the region, and we all of us collectively. Sir, if you would like to react to Professor Kechichian's comments, we'd be very happy to have your word. Sir, your mic is still not unmuted. If you can unmute the mic. There would be a red. Sir, there would be a red.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
yes,
no,
yes, sir.
I have educated myself sufficiently. It's not a subject that I know very well. I mean, my acquaintance with Lebanon is of another generation. There's not much I can add to what Dr. Kechichian has said. He knows the subject well enough. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to answer your questions, Mudassir. You've raised a very critical point. Lebanon used to receive on an average year between $7 and $8 billion from the Gulf countries in terms of remittances. There are approximately anywhere between 600 to 650,000 young Lebanese who are working in the Gulf, mostly in Saudi Arabia, in the UAE, but there are also some in Kuwait and Qatar, and a small number in Oman. So these individuals mostly have been sending back to Lebanon between, as I said, between $7 and $8 billion per year. Now, what happened is that this Ponzi scheme that the central bank had created has collapsed now. The money that was coming in during the past decade or 2 decades every year essentially allowed the central bank and all the banks in this country to offer depositors very high interest rates. If, for example, I get on my US bank account, savings account, less than 1% return per year, the interest rate that Bank of America gives me is 1% per year. Whereas if I put the same amount of money in a Lebanese bank, in US dollars, I could get up to 6% interest rate every year. This is very high. Most people around the world don't get 6% or 7% interest rates. If you put it in Lebanese pound, you get even higher rates. You get 11%, 12% interest rates. Obviously, this is a Ponzi scheme. that has now collapsed, literally collapsed. Why? Because the banks no longer allow you to withdraw money from the banks. If you have a bank account and if you want to go to the bank, you get a monthly limit of 1,000 US dollars, of course, not in US dollars. You get the equivalent in Lebanese pounds, and not at the black market rate. You get it at a reduced rate. So therefore, the banks are continuing the stealing process, the corruption that they're involved in. Now, the question that Dr. Kwamar asked, will the $7 to $8 billion coming from the Gulf will continue to come during the next few years? The answer is no. Nobody is going to bring fresh cash to Lebanon because they're not aware and they're afraid, they're not aware of the reforms, and they're afraid that this money that they've earned, it's their money, will be blocked in the banks. What they will do, they will bring with them cash, maybe $10,000 or whatever, when they visit once or twice a year, to give to their parents, elderly folks. I mean, there are more elderly people in Lebanon than there are young people because all the young people are out. So this is essentially now a geriatric society. There are very few young people here. So they're going to bring, the young people come and visit their parents. They bring with them $10,000, let's say. I'm using that number on the top of my head. So that couple can live for 6 months to 9 months with that money. But nobody is going to bring in hard-earned currency. The parliament is now thinking about capital control, whereby they will impose strict measures, but the parliament failed to pass capital control. This project failed in parliament. Imagine, the country is in such financial situation that the parliamentarians are not even able to agree on controlling the money that the country is going through. So why is that the situation? Very simply because parliamentarians have their own bank accounts, and they don't want to see their bank accounts disappear overnight. Because obviously, if their money is blocked, they will not have access to it. But as I've quoted to you in my brief talk about the Financial Times article, the former Director General, the resigned, not former yet, the resigned Director General says that $6 billion was whisked out of the country. My reading and people that I know who tell me this money is much larger than the 6 billion. People are talking about numbers that are nearly $30 billion in US dollars that have been whisked out of the country. Now, bankruptcy, the other question that you asked me, it's already bankrupt. There are thousands of companies that are closing. Shops are closing, restaurants are closing. You go down to the market to buy something. If you buy it today for $5, the equivalent in Lebanese pounds, of course, and you refuse to buy it today thinking that maybe the price will go down tomorrow, you will go and find it for $10. The bankruptcy is already there. Trust me, it's a failed system. It cannot be saved.
Thank you, Professor. And I think you have made some of the points very clear. But there are a few questions which came while you were responding to the previous questions. There were questions. I mean, there were discussions regarding the IMF relief package, and then which was asked by Divya, and then there was a question by Soumya who asked about the Chinese investment plan in Lebanon and also the political support of Hezbollah to the Chinese plan rather than the IMF package. So how that is going to play out. There was another question by Ahmed who was asking about the implication in terms of the political situation, how the corruption or the financial crisis which Lebanon is going through will affect the political situation. And I think perhaps we can add the point that we have seen Lebanon going through several rounds of protests, especially by the young people. Initially, it was the protest. I mean, protest was largely non-sectarian. Then gradually, perhaps it also kind of moved into a sectarian structure. There was also a question regarding the security implication, not only for Lebanon, but for the broader, Levant region. So perhaps you can, reflect on these issues, and then if there are further questions.
I can see the chat questions in front of me, but before, I want to answer the question that you raised about the protests, because that's a very important question. The protests died down, essentially. From October 19th to roughly February 2020, October last year, 2020, February this year, there were lots of demonstrations. But the new government, when they came in February, they took a measure, very strong measure, to actually send in the army in the streets of Beirut. And the army used batons and beat up a whole bunch of people. And this is the army that cannot defend the Lebanon from either Syria or Lebanon, its two neighbors, but it's very successful at beating up its own society. So therefore, the army has demonstrated once again that its priorities are misplaced. Instead of standing with the people, instead of supporting the public demands, they are essentially following the orders of law and order officials, saying it is not allowed to block streets, it is not allowed to demonstrate, you are not allowed to vent your frustrations in public. You can only vent your frustrations in private, and make sure that we don't listen to you, because we are listening to every telephone conversation, every internet is being, and if we don't like you, we come and arrest you. 5,000 people have been deferred in front of the courts, and some people are still in jail. They're obviously, eventually they're released, because Lebanon has a constitution, and the constitution basically says that there is freedom of speech in this country. But freedom of speech, of course, exists if you don't exercise the freedom of speech. The moment you exercise the freedom of speech, it's no longer freedom of speech. You understand how it works. The system is so sophisticated. So therefore, the political protests have all died down. People don't want to get beat up. They have children with them sometimes in the demonstrations. You don't want to see a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old traumatized by seeing his father or his mother all bloodied because the soldier has beat them up. Obviously, people are not going into the streets right now. Second, the economic catastrophe that has occurred since then has changed the priorities. More people are saying, we're not going to demonstrate because there is no way to change the system. Let us try to figure out how we're going to manage the economy so that we can survive until something happens, whether it's a regional change that occurs, whether the Americans and the Iranians can reach some kind of a deal and impose law and order on Hezbollah, which is wishful thinking as far as I'm concerned, but that's a different matter. So therefore, the protests have died. The political system of the country is not changing. There are no reforms that are coming, either economic, political, social, anything that you want. Now, the IMF package is ready. The IMF has been negotiating with Lebanon. They're saying, IMF officials are saying, we want to help you. Help us to help you. Introduce some reforms, introduce a bit of cosmetic reforms even, so that we can provide you financial assistance. But the government insists that they've already committed all the reforms. They've 97% of all the reforms have been taken care of. And the 3% next week, it will all be 100%. In reality, nothing happens. And the IMF is not gonna give financial support to groups just like that. They have their own regulations, they have their own rules, and they've given money to a whole bunch of countries in the current COVID-19 era. About 50 countries, if I'm not mistaken, have received IMF support one way or the other. I know for a fact that Egypt, for example, has gotten almost $6 billion in financial aid from the IMF, and Hezbollah still thinks that it doesn't need the IMF. At the beginning, it said, we don't want the IMF. We don't want to accept any conditions. Then later said, okay, the IMF can come and they can help us in the areas where we want them. As if the IMF is a smorgasbord. You pick and choose whatever you like, and then you say to the IMF, well, I don't like the rest, take it home with you. It doesn't work that way. And Hassan Nasrallah, Secretary General of Hezbollah, has even gone on record of saying, well, we don't need IMF, we don't need America, we don't need Europe. China will help us. Well, I got news for him. China has not helped anybody except China. China helps itself, and China will provide aid as long as it advances its own interests, not for the interests of Lebanon. Now, time will tell whether or not I am correct in this assessment, but I can see, I don't know whether I've answered Divia's question about this China proposal, but I think that most economists here and overseas are realizing that really the economic solution for Lebanon is to have an IMF package. The IMF package is the one that is conditioned on economic reforms. If that occurs, I think Lebanon will get some financial support. Mind you, this is a very important point. Lebanon is not a poor country. Lebanon is a relatively wealthy society. There is a lot of money in Lebanon, but there is also lots of corruption. And the question is, how is the money divided? Who's gonna take the money? Who's gonna benefit from the money? That's the question. We're not talking about a borderline country like a very poor African country that has no resources and so on. I mean, Lebanon potentially has natural gas and oil in the ocean, and there is a border dispute because the maritime borders with Israel are not delineated yet, and the Israelis have started producing already in one of the blocks, and there is potential lots of resources in Lebanon as well, but we're not there yet. We'll see what happens. And I see there is one more question before time's run out. It says here about the clergy, which is one of my favorite subjects. Are they distributing food? Are they contributing? I mean, to aid people, yes, food and basic essentials and so on. Yes, there are some clerical institutions that are providing assistance. They are both Muslim and Christian. They are feeding a lot of people, but it's not sufficient. They need to do a lot more. And these are based on contributions coming from Saudi Arabia, from the Emirates, from Kuwait. Wealthy individuals in these countries are giving financial aid to the various departments to provide financial assistance. And I see that there is one other question from Shadab Raza here. Can there be a way through which the upcoming Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund goes to Lebanon to help? You know, the Saudis over the years have poured into Lebanon hundreds of billions of dollars. The Lebanese became wealthy because of Saudi Arabia. Thousands of Lebanese have worked there and earned their living. They worked for 50 plus years, and it was Saudi Arabia and Prince Saud al-Faisal, the foreign minister, who worked on the Taif Accord that ended the civil war back in 1989, 1990. So the Saudis have always been supportive of the Lebanese, both Christian and Muslim, and they have given to Christians as well. The cardinal of the Maronite Church a couple of years ago went to Riyadh. He was well received, and they even gave him money to restore some of the old churches in the deserts of Saudi Arabia. So therefore, the Saudis have always provided money in the past, but they're not going to right now. I can assure you that Saudi Arabia is not going to give Lebanon any financial assistance because of Hezbollah. Let's be clear about that. Because of Hezbollah. And as long as Hezbollah says, I am pro-Iran, they should not expect money from Saudi Arabia. The dispute between Saudi Arabia and Iran is existential, and it's not going to change overnight. And it's going to, for it to be resolved, it's going to take a long time. And I think that it is unrealistic for the Saudis to expect that the Saudis will pour in lots of money in this country. Whether strangely enough, here is the beauty. This is really contradictory. Here is the beauty. Not a single Lebanese official has ever said, let's go and ask Iran for some financial support. Why not? If you are pro-Iranian, go and ask Iran for some help. Why do you go to Saudi Arabia and to Kuwait to ask them money? I mean, it's illogical. Corruption has reached such a level that it's even reached the intellectual, corruption in the intellect of these individuals. They want to actually take money from people that they hate. How does that work? How does that work?
Thank you, Professor, for I think giving us a very good account of the problems facing Lebanon. I think you have hit the bullseye by identifying corruption as the problem facing Lebanon right now. I think